Man, from episode 1 of Falcon and Winter Soldier, I felt like Taylor Swift, because I knew John Walker was trouble when he walked into the MCU. I knew that he would become the US agent and represent this twisted, off-kilter version of Captain America. Not because I'm some sort of super genius, but because it's in the comics, man. And just seeing this chump for the first time with a smug face, pretending to be the Cap. Nah, I had a lot of reasons to not get behind this guy. But what I didn't expect was the nature of his mental decline. As I saw Johnny W slowly descend into madness, I found myself oddly sympathizing with him. I saw a man trying to do so much, but was only able to do so much, and in the end this gap drove him over the edge. So what caused his breakdown? Why did John Walker fail as Captain America? I'm the guidance guy, and your internet school counselor is going to shine a light on the downfall of an American icon. So let's start with how the discount captain got his title in the first place. It wasn't simply given to him or that he was able to buy it with his millions, he earned it. He was at the top of his class, peak physical condition, and proven in the battlefield. It was as if John was born to be Captain America. Not only that, but he had the hype machine backing him up. He had the backing of both the American government and the American public. He had it made, he had the qualifications, he earned his spot fair and square, and he had the people waiting for him to do his thing. But with all these expectations, there comes a dark side to that reality. A dark side that eventually consumed him. Have you ever gotten something that you've always wanted, something that you've put all of yourself to earn, only to realize that the experience you wanted so badly wasn't at all what you thought it would be? It's an odd and frankly discouraging situation to go through. It's like getting the Christmas present that you've wanted all year, only to realize that the reality of having said gift did not match the expectations. And that discouragement is symbolic to what happened to the Diet Captain. He had the credentials, he was given the role of Captain America due to his own merit, and throughout the episodes of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we see a man who is struggling deep with imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the experience of someone doubting their place in a high-achieving position or scenario and believing themselves to be a fraud. It's the doctor who feels like they don't deserve to be in the profession. It's the pro athlete who thinks they got drafted too high and isn't good enough as everyone says she is. And for John, it's the man who was given the title of Captain America but who struggled to convince himself that he can carry through with the expectation that comes with that rank. Now, despite the name, imposter syndrome is not classified as a mental illness. It is recognized by mental health professionals as an experience that people go through, and they warn of its destructive potential, but no one's going around getting diagnosed with this. And it's clear that Walker was fighting that battle. When we see him get ready for his GMA event, he talks to Olivia and Lamar about all the things that being Captain America means, and how he feels about having to live up to Steve's legacy. He also mentions his plight to our reluctant buddy cop duo in the Jeep when he says that he's trying his best to be the best captain he could possibly be. And as time went on, we see other signs in Walker. We see the self-doubt. We see him believing that he got chosen to become the Cap, not because of his character and dedication, but outside factors like the mission that he and Lamar went on. We see the stress that comes with imposter syndrome. And that stress followed Walker through the entire series. The stress to perform, the stress to stop the Flag Smashers, the stress of being Captain America. And eventually we saw this stress evolve into frustration and anger as he saw his efforts be either not appreciated or just not enough to get the job done. Just take a look at this scene right here. That scene is J-Dub's experience as Captain America in a nutshell. He's trying to make a difference, trying to do work, only to get wrecked by everything around him. Now, why is that? The reason why Walker had so much trouble in his time as the Cap is because the right people didn't respect him. Notice how I didn't say no one respected him, because that wasn't true. He clearly had the approval of the public and the government. They respected him for sure. But the thing is, before he took the serum, there was only so much a human could do in the MCU. If you're a human with genius intellect and advanced tech, then you're good. If you're a straight up god, then clearly you'll get stuff done. But if you're just a very athletic guy with above average intelligence and a borrowed shield, then you're gonna have some problems. No one with more ability than the average human gave Walker the time of day. Not Falcon, not Bucky, not the stupidly named Flag Smashers, and certainly not Wakandian warriors. And why is that? I mean, he was Captain America. He even said so. Multiple times.
I am Captain America. I am Captain America.
Oy. It's one thing for Tony to loudly proclaim who he was because that was the identity that he created for himself, but for this guy, he didn't make the captain. The captain made him. It boils down to this. Walker wanted respect, but all he had was a title. Anyone outside of the masses knew that Johnny Boy didn't earn his stripes as America's hero. Yes, he passed the government-sanctioned audition, but he hadn't stopped any super Nazis. He hadn't upheld the highest values through example and sacrifice. To them, he was just a Captain America cosplayer, and they treated him as such. Sure, he earned his way to his spot in the eyes of the common man, but at that level that he found himself in, his best wasn't good enough on the hero level. But wait a minute, guidance guy, you may be wondering. Good old Steve had to earn his spot as Captain America too. Sure, it wasn't exactly the same as Walker's situation, but he had to show himself worthy to people before they threw him into the super steroid machine. And that's true, but here's the major difference between these two men and ultimately why Rogers is held in such high regard. It comes down to character. Let me ask you something. How did Steve react to adversity? Remember, before he took the serum, Rogers was a shrimpy guy. He was small, skinny, and really had no right to be in the armed forces. And he was rejected by the army multiple times due to his stature and numerous health issues. But he was determined to jump into battle because of his utter disdain for injustice and the bullies of the world. And he was willing to try and try and try again until he broke through. He pushed through multiple rejections and his own weak body and showed those around him that even when he didn't have the means, he had the will. He saw the difficulties and dug deep into his well of determination and got what he needed to continue. But on the other hand, what did Jay Walker do when trouble came? He got surly, angry, impatient. He snapped at people and got impulsive. Why is that? Because on top of everything else we've discussed, with Walker, the pressure defined his motivation. Take away all the big talk he gave on Good Morning America and all the marketing. What we see is someone who wanted so badly to live up to the idea of Captain America that it became his reason for being Captain America. When he couldn't recruit Sam and Bucky, or when Carly got away, or when he couldn't protect Lamar, his headspace was in the place of, Steve would have been able to do this. He never says it outright, but you can tell that's what's going through his head. It was never about protecting his fellow Americans or about safeguarding innocents from terrorists. It was all about him. It was about his role, about him being the hero. And it's that character deficit that we saw not just grow, but ultimately expose him as not being worthy of carrying the shield. But now that we've unwrapped all of this, does any of this translate to our existence? Well, quite a bit actually. This is what I love so much about the MCU. We see these stories of deities, superhumans, and magic that on one hand are so insane, so ridiculous, and so grand, but at the same time be so intimate and human. We not only see the bombastic exploits of heroes, but the inner battles that we'd otherwise never see. And with the Copy Captain, we see him reach those levels of grand spectacle, but in the end realize that it was his inner limitations that caused him more trouble than his physical ones. And I see insights from Johnny Walker, no, not that one, that we could use as we go through instances where we can enter our next level so that we don't fall for the same traps. And the first thing we gotta watch for is stress management. No matter who you are or what you do, stress impacts us all. I often see students, regardless of academic ability, tie themselves into knots over high-stakes tests that can determine anything from what classes they will take next year to whether they'll even get to the next grade. And if you have a job, you may worry about how well you're performing or about a major project coming up. Stress is universal, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean that we're condemned to a world of worry. We have multiple options at our disposal to help control our reaction to the things we can't control. Reading, meeting up with friends, gaming, enjoying nature, journaling. I could keep going with this. If you have a thing and you like doing the thing, then that thing can help you regulate the pressures of life. Naturally, you can't overindulge in it because that's just counterproductive, but finding a balance is key. A good way to gauge whether or not you have that balance is to simply ask yourself, Am I able to enjoy this activity and still do what I need to do? If you can answer yes to that honestly, nice, you're on the right path. If not, then it's time to take a second look at them priorities. Walker didn't do that, and he allowed the stress of being Captain America push him to a place where his emotions ruled him. And we all know how that turned out. Another step to master when wanting to overcome pressure situations is to go back to our motivation. Obviously, the first step in that side quest is to make sure you have one. You need to have a why behind the things you do. And no, reasons like, because I have to and I don't have a choice, aren't good enough. Even if you're required to do something, there needs to be a stirring within you. Is there someone who you could dedicate your work to? What positive outcome can occur only by staying consistent? So start there, and then once you have it, have that motivation close to you. No, really, have it close to you. Whether it's on your mind when you think about it often, or you have it written down on a sticky somewhere that you see every day. And here's the kicker on that motivation. You have to make sure that this motivation is not all about you. That's the mistake that the store brand captain made. His motivation on the surface was about serving the country, but beneath all that, it was really about gaining respect and power from the Shield. And when he didn't get it, he started to act desperate. But the most important part of keeping your cool in the most intense situations is having confidence in yourself. Sounds basic, right? It's exactly the sort of thing a guidance counselor would say, isn't it? But listen, I'm not that kind of hokey rainbows and kittens school counselor, okay? When I say have confidence in yourself, I mean knowing who you are as a person. And even that sounds like a massive task, but all that means is being able to know your strengths, your weaknesses, and what you stand for. Knowing those three things will give you everything you need to understand yourself and see your own worth. Because at the core of it all, Johnny's doubts came from a lack of confidence. Why do you think he was so hung up on not being a super soldier? He was deeply insecure about being the stars and stripes without having some enhanced muscle to throw around. And when he found himself getting wrecked by someone with more abilities than a street punk, it just made that insecurity grow and led him to taking the serum anyway. We can never handle the pressure if we don't believe we can handle it in the first place. And even though John Walker's story is a downer one about a war hero elevated to the highest heights only to be brought down by his own fears and insecurities, that doesn't mean that our lives need to follow that same path. We always have the chance to improve ourselves, understand ourselves, and love ourselves, and we need to take them, so that when we get our come up, we'll be ready to fearlessly take on that challenge. You know, old Bucky's had it rough. Going from fighting in World War II to becoming a Hydra puppet to being hated by your allies when they find out that you killed their parents when you were brainwashed. I mean, if Steve Rogers is Aang from Avatar, he fought in a war, got stuck in a block of ice, was revived to save the world, Bucky is what would have happened if after being thawed out, Aang was discovered by the Fire Nation. If they had brainwashed Aang into fighting for the Fire Lord, whew, that show would have been dark. That would have been... You know what? Let's just stick to talking about Bucky, because we don't need any alternate Avatar universes right now. I'm not gonna lie here. When talking about all the world-changing, world-ending, bigger-than-life characters of the MCU, I personally tend to forget about the Winter Soldier the most. You'd think that honor would go to Hawkeye. But come now, Hawkeye being the most unnecessary member of the Avengers is why he's remembered. That being Discount Green Arrow, that is. And while you're here, don't you forget to do the YouTube thing and like and subscribe. Honestly, if it weren't for Captain America reminding us of how important Bucky was to him, I'd almost think that the MCU would have left him alone after Civil War. But hey, that's what the Falcon and the Winter Soldier is for, right? For us to finally get to understand this guy now that there's not someone perpetually trying to kill him. And even though we're only 2 episodes in at this point, we're seeing a timeless theme with our time-displaced friend, seeking forgiveness and making amends. Bucky wants to make things right after everything he's done. And that's definitely a commendable thing. Cause let's be real here, he doesn't have to do this. Homeboy helped save the world and the universe from Thanos and undo the snap. One could argue that there's nothing more that he could do to make amends than what he's already done. Then he has a pardon, so he's legally absolved of all guilt. But ask anyone who's messed up in a relationship, even when you know things are good between you and someone else, sometimes it doesn't always feel that way. There's that nagging sense of, I need to do more, it's not enough. So what do you do if you feel like Bucky? Like your guilt is sticking to you like gum on your shoe? I'm the guidance guy, and your internet school counselor has made this intro way too long. Let's just get into this. Naturally, before we get into how we move on from persistent guilt, we first need to discuss just what causes it in the first place. And I think I can speak for everyone when I say, we all know how guilt works. You do a bad, and then you feel bad for doing the bad. And that's okay. It's actually a good thing to experience guilt when you've transgressed in some way. Fun fact, when you type in why guilt into Google, some of the common phrases it gets is why guilt is pointless and why guilt is a useless emotion. And let me say this right now. If you or someone you know truly believes that guilt is a pointless emotion, either get help or run, because that person is a sociopath who feels no remorse. And as a certain high-speed hedgehog likes to say,
that's no good.
That's right, Sonic. That's right. We need guilt as a way for our bodies to tell us that we violated some rule or made some mistake. The problem comes when we stagnate in guilt. And that's the problem we find with the Winter Soldier these days. Despite everything he's done in the name of justice and the protection of humanity, he still feels like it's not enough. And this is where guilt can become a problem. When we live in that guilt and feel like we need to complete some exhaustive list of actions in order to get rid of it. This is what's called a guilt complex, a mindset in which you believe you've done something wrong or will do something wrong. And some of the signs of it are an obsession with past mistakes, regret, anxiety, and sleep problems. Those all sound familiar, right? Because Bucky's got them. Why else does he go around trying to tie up loose Hydra ends? Why is he hanging out with family members of his victims? He's incapable of moving past his sins. And hopefully we can see our 50s man grow past his history and embrace his new reality just like his best friend did. But how will we be able to do it? How can we move past the guilt complex? Stay tuned! When looking at the Winter Soldier and all of the weight of the pain he's been carrying around for decades, it's understandable that he would want to take some time to mentally recover from it all. And like him, there are 3 steps that we could take to move on from a guilt complex. One action we could take is by sharing your experience with someone else. It could be a close friend, a family member, or as in Bucky's case, getting professional help to work through everything. Guilt can be an isolating emotion that tricks us into thinking that we're alone in our struggles. But we're not. There's always someone who's there to care, to listen, and to help. The second step is actually something that good old Cap did. He saw the positive in his situation. Steve is literally the only other person who's experienced what Bucky's gone through. Well, minus all the brainwash-induced murder. And one of the strongest traits of America's hero is his ability to see the good in just about anything. This guy could even see the silver lining of half the universe being dusted. Perhaps Bucky could catch up with his old friend as a way to seek the solace he so desperately is searching for. But truly, the best way for Bucky and for us to live past guilt is to forgive ourselves. Like I said in my SpongeBob mini, forgiveness is empowering yourself to not let what someone else did to you hold you back. And sometimes we tend to hold ourselves back with our own guilt. And it can come from things that we know we're wrong, or we could just be punishing ourselves with what we feel we deserve. And I'm certain that's what's happening to Bucky. And in order for him and us to live a guilt-free life, we need to be willing to forgive ourselves, admit we did wrong, know that we're remorseful about it, show that by avoiding those actions again, and allowing yourself to live past those moments. Let's see if our robo-armed hero can make that leap. And even if he doesn't, that doesn't mean that you can't take the first steps to make an amends with your past and yourself. Yeah, I know I'm late to this party, like strolling in when all the food is gone late. But you know who else is late to this? Marvel, because they should have done this movie, about 10 years ago. Imagine for a moment a trilogy of Black Widow movies featuring the darkest version of the Incredibles throughout the MCU. Imagine enjoying these films and actually having some kind of tension because the main character isn't already dead and all these events didn't already happen. Okay, I'm gonna lay off the salt now. I'm done. But what really got me thinking in Black Widow was all the work that went into making a widow. Yes, it definitely involved a lot of sci-fi magic to get an army of women to blindly follow orders on demand, but even though there's no IRL version of the Red Room, concepts of changing and influencing behavior? Oh yeah, that stuff is used in therapies, schools, the military, it's all over the place. The formal word for it all is behavioralism, a branch of psychology that focuses on the behaviors and motivations of humans and ways to influence it. And this movement goes back over 100 years and has built giants of science such as John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner. And there have been landmark experiments that have defined the field for the decades. Like in the 1890s, Ivan Pavlov did an experiment on dogs that revealed that dogs can be trained to salivate at the sound of a metronome when the metronome was associated with getting food. That was the beginning of what's now called classical conditioning, in which a subject can be trained to have a conditioned response, which in this case was them licking their chops like a cartoon wolf, to a conditioned stimulus, which for Pavlov was the metronome. Another was the Little Albert experiment by John B. Watson, in which he took a 9-month-old baby and essentially conditioned him to be afraid of mice. How? By making a loud noise every time Albert interacted with a white mouse. Over time, Albert began to cry just at the very sight of the little animal. Now, if that experiment sounds shady, it's because it is. There's no way the experiment would be repeated today. Taking a tiny human and training it to be afraid of something that had no fear of beforehand is not cool by today's scientific standards. So science has already shown that someone's behavior can be influenced by someone else through various means. But is that the same thing as mind control? Well, let's take a look at how things are done in Black Widow. In the film, Black Widows are indeed straight up forced to obey orders of their commanding officers and ultimately Dreykov. They're incapable of going rogue and doing their own thing. Shoot, they're not even able to attack Dreykov due to his pheromone lock. But right off the bat, we see some complications. Though we know that behavior can be changed to produce a specific result, getting to that point takes time. It can take weeks or months for a new behavior to become learned, depending on what the specific behavior is. This is probably why most New Year's resolutions don't work. We give up on them too soon. So the instantaneous hypnotizing kind of mind control is just movie magic. But what we do see is a lot of conditioning that went down in the Red Room, as well as with the supernatural mind puppetry. We already spoke about classical conditioning, but there's also operated conditioning. Unlike the classical version, in which the subject is only required to react to an object, sound, or event, in operated conditioning, the person in question is playing a much more active role. When it comes to operated conditioning, the goal is to either remove or add a new behavior through reward or punishment. A reward is exactly what it sounds like, getting something good that you want for completing a task. And punishment can come in the form of either receiving a negative consequence or having a positive consequence withheld. In the case of the Black Widows and their training, the goal was to make them dedicated, focused, and efficient soldiers and espionage artists around the world. That was done through pretty much any means necessary. It's pretty fair to say that the ladies of the Red Room were objects of punishment if they did not meet Dreykov's expectations, which went as far as losing your life if you as much as lost a sparring match against another widow in training. So needless to say, the stakes were high, which is what makes it even more incredible that Natasha was able to get out of that toxic environment, start over, become a hero, and finally find the family she had been looking for her whole life. And perhaps it's that fact of Romanov's life that's the biggest takeaway for us. We've all been in situations we wish we weren't in, whether it's a friendship, living situation, and it doesn't matter if you were at fault or not. We're all going to experience that at some point. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a choice. Do we want to stay in this trash situation, or do we want to break out? Do we want to get out and create a new future, a new opportunity for ourselves? And that's what Natasha did. She got herself out of a seemingly impossible scenario, took the opportunity to restart her life and get what she wanted out of life. And if she can do it, what's our excuse? We're not being mind controlled. We're not being conditioned to somebody else's image. Think about your life. What about it do you want to change? Go ahead and put it in the comments. Let's find out. And from there, make a plan to how you can get there. If you're running into trouble, go ask for help. Don't be afraid to do it. Do whatever it takes to make your future. This is perhaps the most underrated theme of this movie. You are not defined by your circumstances. Fight and take your future back. It's what Black Widow did. What will you do? Now, I'm gonna say this from the jump. This is not gonna be a hit piece against Loki fangirls or fanboys. If Loki's your boy, then don't have any shame in it. And don't let me stop you. Besides, at the end of the day, he ain't real anyway. But as the God of Mischief finally takes the spotlight with his own show, now is as good a time as any to give a little tongue-in-cheek warning to anyone who may be tempted to keep people like Loki around in their lives. And yes, there are people with the same mental makeup as the Master of Magic, and we need to be able to know these snakes when we see them and act accordingly. So what about Loki do we need to be careful of in our own lives? I'm the guidance guy, and your internet school counselor is gonna break down this tricky fiend so you don't get broken by those like him in the real world. For Loki, I'm actually gonna start with a clip from my Vision Mini to begin our look into this guy. And the New York incident with Loki? You can't really blame Thor, seeing how Loki's inferiority complex is what caused him to try to take over the world. And if you haven't seen that mini, you know what to do. Go down to the description below or to that special corner up top and check it out. But for our would-be king, he does indeed have an inferiority complex, which is a mentality of feeling like you don't measure up in at least one area of life, which can lead to feelings of depression and as well as attempts at compensation. The odd thing about inferiority complexes is that it's not an actual medical diagnosis, but like say imposter syndrome, it's a phenomenon that's acknowledged by mental health professionals. But we do see this in Loki in both as a child and as an adult. As a young one, he always felt less than when compared to young Thor, like he was living under the shadow of his brother and thus had very little chance to stand out, much less become king of Asgard. And that jealousy followed Loki as he and the Thunder God got older, but for the Horned One, his complex manifested in a different way. Instead of brooding over how much he would never be king like a certain feline in a similar situation, his inferiority complex manifested in the latter half of the definition, namely aggressive overcompensation. And, I mean, he hasn't done that too many times, right? Except for all the times he tried to kill Thor and that time he tried to take over the world. And for you gifted students out there, yes, this is all due to a low self-esteem. Loki's feelings of inferiority are directly linked to his less than stellar view of himself. He felt like he wasn't good enough to be king, that he wasn't on the same level as Thor. Those feelings never stopped him from trying, mind you, but those thoughts were still swirling in his head. And for us, we gotta watch out for these kinds of people. This is not to say to avoid people with low self-esteem. Absolutely not. Those people need encouragement, support, and friendship just as much as anyone else. What I am saying though is to be careful around those whose low self-esteem leads them to take out their toxic feelings about themselves onto other people. And this can show in many different ways, either by creating drama amongst friends, manipulating people, and even bullying. They may pull you in with a sad story that makes them the victim in order for you to see things their way, or even twist things to make you feel like the villain. That's what Loki's done, and that's what the Lokis of the world would do if you allow them. But let's move on for now to perhaps Loki's biggest vice, his narcissism. In the last Goddess Guide, we brought up the possibility of Cruella de Vil having narcissism. And though in her case, labeling her with narcissism wasn't so cut and dry, it definitely is so for our puny god over here. Let's go over some of the symptoms of narcissism real quick. Exaggerated sense of importance, requires constant praise and validation, desires to be seen as superior, takes advantage of others to get what they want. Now, that's not all the traits, but you know that all just screams Loki. He doesn't just believe that it's all about him. He wants everybody to make it all about him. He desperately wants the adoration, the praise, and ultimately the validation that he felt he didn't get when he was younger. Now, some of you may look at this and go, well, yeah, who would want to hang around someone who has a psychological desire to be propped up at all times? And if you think like that, good! You know how to avoid people who would otherwise make your lives miserable. But then again, narcissists are known for being charming and having a pleasant personality. I mean, I've been exposing all of Loki's crimes and vices this whole time, but even I have something of a soft spot for this guy. He has an underdog aura about him, and his flippant attitude even in the face of the most insane situations. Part of me kinda wants that, to be able to look at harrowing, dangerous scenarios and go, whatever man, that's just cool. So I understand how people could be into this character. I just want to make sure no one's falling for this kind of person IRL. Because it's those kinds of people in our world, they're able to attract people like magnets with their smile, swag, and suave, and then blind them to all the dirty dealings they're committing on the side. And this isn't always easy to catch, because charming people are charming. But in those situations, you need to be able to objectively look at what they do. Do they treat everyone equally? Or do they only shower love on those who give them what they want? Do they lash out at those who disagree with them? Do they demand loyalty from those around them while having no such loyalty for anyone other than themselves? That's how you can pin a narcissist. Don't pay attention to the words, pay attention to their actions. If their actions don't match up with their glowing words, then watch out. But even with all this, there's still one more trend to watch out for when detecting out the Lokis among us: the twisting of the truth. So what we've got so far is a narcissist with low self-esteem and an inferiority complex. But we're not done yet, because the two-time king of Asgard is also a pathological liar. I mean, at this point, it comes with the territory. You can't be the god of mischief and not be able to deploy at least a little bit of deception here and there. But he takes it to another level. He can control people's minds and fill it with whatever he wants, hide his own presence, change his appearance like a regular Mystique, and even create illusions. You know, it's a shame that he's a bad guy, because he would have made a killer spy, man. Talk about missing your calling. But no, what he does instead is use his abilities to try to prop up himself and subjugate everybody around him in order to satisfy his own ego. And it's this trickery, this deception that Loki is best known for. It's so bad that Thor can't even trust his own brother. And that's the end result of all liars. Destroyed trust. And to many of us, it may be obvious what to do next. Just walk away and move on to the next. But again, with our real-life Lokis, they got that narcissistic charm going for them. They can, and will, say anything to get you to give them another chance, that they will promise to never do it again. Some may even go as far as to gaslight you and challenge your own perception of reality in order for you to blame yourself so they can walk away faultless. That's how they're able to stay in our lives and call the same tricks from their gamebook over and over again. These kinds of people will lie even when confronted with the truth. So how do you deal with these people? In this case, you gotta cut them off where you can. If you don't have to deal with these people, then don't. These people can change, but don't assume that it's your job to do it. They need to see their need to change. They need to have a desire to change before they can begin that journey. And if you can't ghost them, if you live with them, work with them, then put some distance between yourself and them. Interact with them only if you have to, and when you do, know who you're dealing with. Confirm their statements and confront them when needed. Because just like how Loki was able to slither away with the Tesseract in Endgame, you can't allow liars to wander around your life. Because trust, dealing with someone like that on a daily basis can be draining. And it's better just to cut your losses and move on than to try to play a rigged game. Low self-esteem, narcissism, pathological lying. These are the underlying issues that plague the Prince of Asgard. Is it likely that Loki will experience some kind of change of heart and become a completely different person in his self-named show? Come on now, he ain't changing. He is who he is. And if he did, the fan base would not be happy. But in our own lives, we need to be wary of the villains and self-interested people in our own lives. Sure, our battles against them aren't going to be remotely as grand or dramatic as the ones we see on the big screen, but in some cases, the best thing we can do is to not engage in battle at all. Because at the end of the day, the biggest trap we tend to fall into when dealing with real-life Lokis is to think that we can help them, that we can change them or encourage them onto the right path. Just don't go down that rabbit hole. Because in most cases, these people will know what you're doing and will exploit you for whatever ends that they have for you. That may sound harsh, but there are some people who you need to separate from. You're not giving up on them or abandoning them, but you're saving yourself from the emotional and mental strain that being around them would cost you. Because in our modern age of heroes, we're often tempted to want to save others. But in reality, we can only save ourselves when we make that choice. Naturally, don't be a jerk about it, but you have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and not sacrificing any part of your sanity for the sake of somebody else who's just trying to use you. And make sure that as you go through life, that sometimes you are your own best hero. So now it's Vision's turn to get the Guidance Guy treatment. And our Ruby Cyborg has been on quite the adventure in his time in the world of Marvel. But I've actually got a little bit of a bone to pick with him. And it goes to one line in Civil War. We gotta talk, man, cause this quote right here, it ain't right. But what is it about these 12 words in Civil War that get to me? I'm the Guidance Guy, and let's walk through this. But let's get back to our favorite Superbot. In Civil War, the Avengers are faced with a negative reaction to their collateral damage. After Wanda's misjudgment leading to civilian casualties when going after Crossbones, the UN steps into the picture and suggests a little thing called the Sokovia Accords in an attempt to keep the Avengers in line and prevent further deaths. And as Earth's mightiest heroes discuss getting aboard with the document, Vision puts his 2 cents in. He mentions that since Iron Man broke onto the scene, there's been an increase in superpowered beings going public. And with that spike, there's also been an increase in the amount of what he called world-ending events. And he was right. From the time that Stark said those legendary words,
I am Iron Man.
We've been introduced to Thor, Hulk, War Machine, Scarlet Witch, and reintroduced to Captain America, and have seen the rise of organizations like S.H.I.E.L.D. But on the other hand, we got folk like Ironmonger, Loki, and the Winter Soldier also stepping up. So up until this point, he's talking facts. There's been an escalation in response to the appearance of the heroes that make up the Avengers. But then comes the words that we're going to talk about today. Our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict, and conflict breeds catastrophe. Wait, what? Even as I watched Civil War in the movie theater, I knew something was off about Vision's logic right there. I went, I'm sorry, what? Nah, Viz, that ain't right. Because the thing is, he starts off correct. Let's take that first part. Strength invites challenge. This is true. If we look throughout history, we see instances where one country improves their technology and then another country sees that and goes, oh yeah? Watch what we can do. I mean, that's pretty much what happened during the space race. And the whole nuclear arms race that almost ended the whole world back in the 60s was all about. And we see it in sports as well. Like when the Warriors burst onto the scene knocking down threes and revolutionizing the game, fast forward a few years, and now everybody wants to be a Splash Brother. This is natural. When there's a change to the status quo, there's gonna be a challenge to it in one way or another. Now let's move on to the next part here. Challenge invites conflict. Also straight facts. Unless you're going to run from a challenge, taking on any type of issue is going to bring about some sort of conflict. When we think of conflict, we tend to go first to a confrontation with another person, which this may happen. But that's not the only kind of conflict though. It may be that you're in need to confront an inner struggle, like a fear or insecurity. Or perhaps your confrontation is against your past or actions that you made that you now regret. And in those moments, you won't be able to overcome these challenges unless you enter the conflict with those struggles. Which leads to the last line. Conflict breeds catastrophe. Now, I'm not hating on Vision. He's one of my favorite characters in the MCU, but my boy is just wrong about this. Even in the context of his conversation, he's off the mark. You can make an argument that if Tony never became Iron Man, there'd be no Ironmonger, but why did Stark need to create the armor in the first place? Oh yeah, that's right, because his old pal Obadiah hired a terrorist group to off him and failed. And the New York incident with Loki? You can't really blame Thor, seeing how Loki's inferiority complex is what caused him to try to take over the world. If anything, the Avengers were reacting to those situations, not the ones escalating it. Which led to some genius billionaire playboy philanthropists to try to think of a way to be more proactive. Or did we already forget what Avengers 2 was about? And not to mention that, I'm pretty sure that as bad as multiple alien invasions are, I'm certain the catastrophe would be if the Avengers failed in any of those battles. Case in point,
You should have gone for the head.
So saying that conflict breeds catastrophe is so factually untrue that it's insane. But the thing is, a lot of us fall into this line of thinking. When we live our lives under the mantra of conflict breeds catastrophe, we dedicate ourselves to avoiding any kind of confrontation. It could be as big as not calling out a friend for their self-destructive behavior, or as mundane as not stating our preference when someone asks us where we want to eat. When we're not truly honest with people about our wants and needs, when we say yes when we really want to say no, or we don't share our opinions out of fear of dealing with possible backlash, that's avoiding conflict. And a lot of the time we do this because we're afraid. We truly believe that if we rock the boat or show dissension in any way, that nothing but utter disaster awaits. And we tend to put it under the guise of being nice, which, honestly, I just hate that word. Nice is what you call your grandma's Thanksgiving dish that you secretly don't like, but you say it's nice so that you don't offend Granny. It's the word we use to describe people that we don't know, but we know they're not a tool. But just like the term nice guy, being nice is not so much about being kind, but about people pleasing and being disingenuous. Conflict doesn't always breed catastrophe. It can lead to awkward moments and some friction, but it can also lead to a new understanding between people. And like with anything else, how you do something is just as important as doing it. If you're going to engage in conflict by being a belligerent clown who doesn't treat anyone's opinions or feelings like they matter, then yeah, catastrophe awaits. But if you're honest, willing to listen and understand the other person's point of view, and work towards understanding instead of winning, then you're looking towards a peaceful resolution, which, ironically, is what Vision was looking for all along. Alright MCU, we need to have a talk. You've been putting out some of the greatest action movies of the last decade and have turned yourself into a cultural phenomenon. And you get major props for that, and I've deeply enjoyed the vast majority of your output since the very beginning. Except those ones. Wait, seriously? That one counts? Okay, fine, whatever. But here's the thing. There's been a lot of love poured on Captain Marvel for her standing as an S-rank female hero in the MCU, but have you forgotten about the female hero you already had? Okay, yes, she was here first, but that's not who we're talking about today. I'm talking about Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, son. I mean, you haven't forgotten completely since WandaVision is a thing and it looks like something trippy awesome, but why did that take so long? She has a great story and is one of the most powerful heroes in the whole MCU. In fact, I think that Scarlet Witch could take on Captain Marvel in a fight and win. And I'm not the only one who believes that. But this is not a fan rant. We're here today to discuss Wanda's journey from her first appearance in the MCU to now and how she's grown, and specifically how she's responded to loss. It may be hard to see since she didn't get the same amount of screen time as Black Widow or Cap, but it's there, and that's where we're gonna go in this video. Where's the connection between the Scarlet Witch and our own lives? I'm the guidance guy, and it's gonna be my job to find it. And watch out for them spoilers for all of this. Just watch out. And I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to do the YouTube thing. Give this video a like, subscribe if videos like this are your thing, and ring that bell so that you're in the loop about what's going on this channel. When looking back at the MCU for examples of loss in Wanda's life, there are a few examples that we can think of at the top of our heads. But man, Red's life has been littered with pain. Now, we know that tragedy is pretty much a prerequisite for becoming a comic book superhero, but Wanda got it bad. And it all started from an early age, of course. When she and her brother were 8, they both lost their parents while they were just having dinner. A massive tragedy right off the bat. And as time went on, she not only lost most of her family, but her home country, Sokovia. As Crimson and Quicksilver got older, they began to see that their home was a prize in a tug of war between America and Hydra. And it's not like they took this situation lying down. These two were involved, participating in protests and eventually finding themselves working with Hydra in an attempt to take down the Avengers, and then later on, siding with Ultron. Now, if you don't completely remember Age of Ultron, it's okay. I didn't either at first. The best part of that whole movie was that montage with the heroes chilling at Avengers Tower, with everything else being a massive blur. But I think all of us remember what happened after the Good Witch, and not the X-Men version of Quicksilver, decided to turn against Marvel's version of Skynet. While trying to protect civilians and Avengers alike, Pietro gave up his own life in order to ensure that Ultron would be defeated. This was the last member of Wanda's family, her closest friend, now gone. And even though she and the other Avengers eventually took down the crazy murder bot, this was just another misfortune in a life that had been molded by it. And the pain piles up in Civil War. At the beginning of the film, Wanda finds herself dealing with a loss of control of her powers. While taking on Crossbones, she prevents the bad guy from possibly taking out Cap, but in her attempt to deflect the blast, she ended up accidentally taking out many relief workers and other innocents. And by the time she's able to get back in the fight and get her confidence back, she's going against her fellow heroes, her friends in the clash between Team America and Team Stark. And even after that battle ended and the dust settled, she ended up losing her freedom along with Falcon, Hawkeye, and Ant-Man ending up in the raft. And even though she and the others do get busted out by Brooklyn's favorite son and get their freedom back, her ordeals aren't over. As Thanos went on his quest to obtain the Infinity Stones, she threw herself into the battle to save half the universe from the Mad Titan. Unfortunately, not only do the Avengers fail in this mission, but Red loses multiple times over. After being convinced that the only way to stop Thanos is by sacrificing the man she loves, Wanda destroys the Mind Stone, and by extension, Vision. But this gambit ultimately fails as Thanos brings Vision back to life, only to kill him again when he steals the stone from him. And with all 5 stones in hand, we know what happens.
You should have gone for the head.
It's at this point that our hero loses absolutely everything when she herself gets dusted in the snap. Dang. Honestly, before writing this episode, I'd forgotten just how much loss Scarlet Witch had gone through in her life. And perhaps you can relate to that. It may not be as tragic as losing a loved one, but at the very least, we've all suffered a loss of normalcy this year, which may have led to feeling isolated, stuck, and anxious for a time for when some version of normal can return. And Our Lady in Red understands this pain perhaps unlike any other MCU hero. But now the question becomes, how does she come out of this cluster of calamity? Understanding and overcoming loss can be a long, emotional, and painful journey for those who choose to go through it. I'm sure you're all aware of the 5 stages of grief, where ideally people make the transition from denial all the way to acceptance. But the straight facts is that people don't just move from stage to stage so smoothly. Some can get stuck in denial and take weeks to even admit reality, while others are controlled by anger and depression, unable to process beyond those instincts. Everyone's journey through loss is different and doesn't always follow a linear path. And we see this with our favorite mind manipulator. After losing most of her family and increasingly her country as she got older, Wanda took her grief and turned it into action by proactively fighting back against the forces that she felt were responsible for the tragedies that befell her, namely Tony and later the Avengers. Whether it was through protests or other political activities, we see her going out there and trying to make a dent in a situation that she didn't ask for but desperately wants to prevent for anyone else. And we've seen this in real life. People who have lost loved ones through no fault of their own, taking to the streets and demanding change for the sake of those that they lost, themselves, and for those who come after them. So definitely a healthy response to her situation. And even the anger that she feels is not only justified, but is utilized into an outlet that is not only helpful emotionally by getting those feelings out, but also to help set the stage for change. However, it's that same anger that gets taken advantage of by both Hydra and Ultron. In the same way she could turn people into puppets at her will? But seriously though, why didn't she use that on Thanos? Couldn't that have just saved them a whole lot of trouble? But anyway, the Super Goose Steppers and TI-3000 saw that pain and used it for their own purposes. And we need to watch out for that as well. It takes a real sort of slime to prey on the emotional vulnerabilities of others, but those types of people do exist and will turn you into their own personal Pinocchio if you allow them. And when they do, like what happened with our Slovakian Slayer, your entire view of your reality can be warped to where you think the good guys are evil and the bad guys are the ones who are really looking out for you. But like I said, that only happens if you allow it. Watch out for people who don't take responsibility for their actions, who feel they have the right to every part of your life and generally seem to attract drama wherever they go. Don't give them second chances. Don't keep them around out of guilt. Just ghost them and move on. Which is something Red ultimately does to both Hydra and Ultron. Later on, we see another reaction to loss that Wanda displays: fear. This defines her arc in Civil War. Here we have a person whose life's mission is to protect others, and in trying to do so makes a mistake that costs the lives of the very people she was there to keep out of harm's way. I have no snarky remark for this one. This hurts, and we've all been there. We're trying our best at whatever it is we're doing, and for one reason or another, we screw up and everything blows up in our face. It sucks, and depending on the severity of the mistake, it can put you in a situation in which you are absolutely petrified of doing anything that could possibly recreate that same situation from happening again. Loss can make us prisoners of fear. That's what happened to Marlin in Finding Nemo, right? I know this is a tangent, but don't worry, we'll get back to our girl soon. After losing almost his entire family within seconds, this clownfish becomes the most helicopter-y of helicopter dads. But he wasn't on some power trip, it was because he'd already lost before and wasn't about to let it happen again. That fear gave him a perverse sense of control, as if his silly routine before leaving home was actually preventing them from being devoured. And that happened to Wanda too. Even though for her part of the movie she was essentially under house arrest, Crimson was afraid that even if she did go out into the world, she would just create more carnage. It took Hawkeye to get her back into the game and realize that the only way forward was to overcome her fears. I ain't gonna front. Confronting your fear, whatever it is, it's not easy. It's uncomfortable, frustrating, and of course, scary as balls. And when we experience loss, we may experience that fear by avoiding a situation or a kind of person, or just playing it way too safe. And the hard truth is that whether it's fear or life, we can't become our best by putting life on easy mode. It's only when we're pushed to our limit, when we wonder if we got anything left in the tank, that we find out just who we are. Do we lay down and become prisoners of fear? Or do we break from those shackles and become stronger than before? And just like the Avengers version of Jean Grey, you don't need to go through that process alone. You will always have at least one person who's able to listen, help, and care. And if you find yourself in that situation, take that first step today. And it's with that we get to the best thing Wanda does to overcome her losses in life. She progresses. I don't want to say that she moves on as if she goes full bum mode Simba on us with,
No, it doesn't matter. Hakuna Matata.
no, you don't just move on from your parents being murdered in front of you or your brother dying on the battlefield. Some forms of loss stay with you, and no amount of everything happens for a reason is gonna make it better. And you know what? That's okay. Sometimes loss becomes a part of our life story, just as long as it doesn't become part of your identity. Everyone is greater than the worst thing that's happened to them, no matter what it is. When you've defined yourself by your loss, that's not progressing. That's staying stuck in the past as if it's continuing to happen. Progressing for some may mean moving on in the traditional sense, leaving the incident be and not bringing it up again. And if doing so allows you to progress and not be held up by the past or by fear, then do that. But in some cases, progress means having a special place for that loss that you occasionally come back to. If you lost a family member, for example, you go back to that place in your soul on their birthday or on a holiday. You may cry or think about them or reminisce with those who knew them. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you can still live your life without fear or stuck in neutral. That's how the Scarlet Witch progressed from the loss of her family, by protesting the violence in her country. And she progressed after Quicksilver's death by joining the Avengers. And when she left the Avengers facility and chose a side in the Civil War, she was beginning the process of progressing from her own mistakes. And in her own way, she sets the tone for how we can progress through life's most challenging moments. So this one was kinda heavy. Now, I want to have fun on this channel, digging into insights on our favorite fictional characters, but sometimes life isn't all fun and games. Real life happens to all of us at some point, and we need to know what to do when it happens. And this is who this video is for. Anyone who's going through real life, real loss, real pain. I don't want this to be some rah-rah pep talk, but to give practical tips for how you can not just move on, but progress through whatever loss or pain you're experiencing. And remember, there is always at least one person willing to listen and care about you. Even if you can't think of someone, that person exists. And be careful that this person has your best interests at heart. And lastly, loss impacts us in different ways. In some cases, we could just walk away from it and be cool. And other times, we need to create that safe space inside of us for that loss. Remember, the goal is not to move on, but to progress. Wanda Maximoff showed us the path to how we can process our pain and come out of it stronger and more capable. And although we'll never have the power of an Infinity Stone, we'll always have the ability to change our lives. So, a little explanation. A few months ago, I did a video on Our Lady in Red to discuss how she responded to the many traumatic experiences that she's gone through, and how she was able to pull through it and become the hero we all know. Well, clearly someone spoke too soon, because our girl did not recover from losing her loved ones. So much so that she kidnapped an entire city and brainwashed them into characters in her own personal sitcom. Yeah, that's totally what a well-adjusted person would do after a personal tragedy. It's only natural that this all happened the way it did. This is pure self-care all the way. So although Wanda may have recovered from some of her past pain, what happened during the events of Infinity War were just too fresh, and she was still reeling from the loss of Vision. And with Cap and Hawkeye gone living their lives, she was left alone, which led to the Westview incident. So this video is going to be a follow-up to my original episode on Wanda. This time, instead of focusing on how she overcame her loss, we're gonna dig into how she did the exact opposite of that in WandaVision. What can Wanda teach us about how not to overcome loss? I'm the guidance guy, and just like one of Wanda's favorite sitcom characters, your internet school counselor has some explaining to do. And if you didn't get that joke, go look it up. Educate yourself, people, come on. Except for perhaps the nerdiest of us, most people didn't know what to expect from WandaVision when we first saw the trailers. It had something to do with old sitcoms and Vision was back somehow. And when we saw the first few episodes, some people just couldn't get behind the I Love Lucy aesthetic that WandaVision was going for. Which to those people, I must say, I feel sorry for you. The commitment of not just simply doing a parody of old style sitcoms, but to replicate it so well? Hate on it all you want, but that was quality stuff right there. But as the show went on and we saw various parts of the MCU come back and interact with each other, we began to unravel the fantasy world that Ms. Maximoff created for herself. And we eventually discovered that the town of Westview and its citizens were simply playing a role in Wanda's attempts to recover from losing the one that she loved the most. And despite the supernatural elements involved in all this, the Scarlet Witch's plan isn't quite as far-fetched as you'd think. Yeah, the exact actions she took are not in the realm of possibility for us, but the intentions behind the actions that Wanda took in processing her grief and pain are what we can all gain from. So what exactly did Red do that we all need to be careful of if we find ourselves in a season of grief? Get ready, because there's a lot going on there. But before we can get diving into Wanda's reaction to grief, we need to see just how grief manifests in our lives and how it can impact us. The first thing we need to realize is that there are different types of grief. We tend to believe that all loss is created equal, but that is far from the truth. The website, What's Your Grief, goes into detail about the many types of grief, and the version that we experience is based on different factors. There's anticipatory grief that can occur when someone has passed away after a long battle with a terminal illness. Masked grief is a more repressed kind of mourning in which the person is holding back their pain. And in Ruby's case, she's experienced traumatic grief, which occurs when losing someone after a sudden and unexpected way. Remember, the original plan wasn't to destroy Vision in order to stop Thanos, but in the desperation of the battle, it was the only option. But not only did Wanda have to destroy Vision herself, she had to watch as he was brought back to life again, only to be destroyed a second time. That's not something you just get over, because with traumatic grief, it's a two-edged struggle. There's dealing with the loss, as well as the event that caused the loss in the first place. Because at its core, grief is about the loss of a connection, be it a person, place, event, or synthetic life form in this situation. The mourning process is coming to terms with the fact that an attachment that we have made in this life is no longer with us. And that's what makes grief so painful. Admitting that and then learning to live a life in which such a vital member of it just isn't there anymore. And of course, grief has no timeline. It's not like the flu where you can just get over it and you'll be fine after a week or two. Depending on the situation, it can take years to fully go through the grieving process. And as long as you're being honest with your experience and your emotions, that's okay. Don't suppress those feelings. Don't force yourself into a timeline that doesn't give you enough time to fully absorb the impact of that loss. If you need to cry, cry. If talking with someone helps, don't deny yourself. I put a link in the description to some various resources in case you're in that situation. And now that we've taken a look at how grief works and how to handle it, let's see how Wanda, well, didn't do any of that. Who knew that the first post-game MCU TV series was going to end up being a massive tutorial on how not to grieve? But that's what we got here in WandaVision. And in giving the Scarlet Witch the spotlight, we not only see how she was brought to the point of creating TV Land City, but the grand lengths that she took to maintain and ultimately have to let go of the false reality she created. And as the show goes on, we're forced to grapple with the fact that even though we understand why Wanda's doing what she's doing, we know what she's doing is wrong and she's going about trying to do a good thing in the wrong way. So let's dig deeper into not just her actions, but the motivation behind the actions and why Crimson's strategy for emotional pain management needed a serious revision. The first and most obvious action Wanda takes in dealing with her pain is that she clings to the past. And I'm gonna say it now just in case you've made it to this point already, but spoiler alert, We eventually discover just why Crimson decided to transform a whole town into an homage to an entire genre of television. During Wanda's grief counseling session with her best neighbor Agatha, we discover that her favorite pastime with her family was watching these old-timey comedies, and it was while they were watching one of them that she ended up losing her family. Ignoring the retcon of how her parents died, the event of losing your family suddenly, especially at a young age, will impact you as you get older and can have devastating negative impacts on you as well. The stress that comes from experiencing and attempting to process such an event, the temptation of maladapting coping strategies, and even the development of the brain can all be factors for children who go through such traumatic events. But Wanda was able to channel that loss into productivity and purpose by protesting against the chaos going on in her home country. And as we know, that wasn't the only loss that she had to deal with. Later on, she had to come to terms with the loss of the OG Pietro at the hands of Ultron, and Vision played a major role in helping our hero recover from that sudden event. But after the events of Infinity War and Endgame, after losing Vision to the hands of Thanos, Wanda had reached her limit. She wanted to return to a time before all the pain, all the loss that she experienced in her life, and the Westview incident was her attempt to create a space for herself away from all of that, not just for herself, but for her lost love. She created a world that not just reflected the past, but she attempts to recreate the past by bringing Vision back. And though we don't have the ability to wind back the clock to a more favorable time, we may be tempted to stay in the past in other ways. We may become obsessed with the past and only see the good parts of yesterday instead of the whole picture. We can become afraid of the future, fearful of any kind of change. Wanda lived through that. She could care less about what the future looked like, because to her it could never compare to the past that was so violently stolen from her. And it was her obsession with recreating the past that led to her next misstep. She chose to escape instead of confront. You'll notice that the Westview incident didn't happen in New York or Chicago or any other big-time city where anyone would notice what was going on within seconds. Nah, she chose some quiet suburban town in the outskirts of Jersey, and it's not like she told anyone what she was gonna do either. She didn't go chat with Hawkeye or Old Man Cap about it before she created the Hex. She did this all on her own, and she did it all as a means to escape. Now, we all need a getaway every once in a while. Trust, in the world that we're in right now, the importance of breaking away from the grind and getting some time off is perhaps more important now than ever. But there's a difference between the occasional vacation and what we see from our magic lady. What she's doing is engaging in a very toxic version of escapism. She's literally running away from the dark realities of the Infinity War, the snap, and the fallout from it all to create her own reality in which those events have no effect on her. And when you're going through any tough time, you can't afford to deny reality. Whatever happened, happened. Pretending it didn't happen, living in denial and distracting yourself from life as you know it are all forms of escape that can become a substitute for dealing with our pain. And we do this because avoiding the pain is much easier than taking it on. Let's face it, pain isn't fun, discomfort is uncomfortable. But in order to progress past pain, we must not allow ourselves to become entrenched in our desire for ease. Doing that could mean getting professional help, or even something as simple as taking a walk by yourself, or actually allowing yourself to truly feel your emotions about a particular event. And if you find yourself having trouble with that part, bring someone along on your journey. In Wanda's case, she didn't have to face the truth alone. Monica was more than willing to help out by telling her that she was available. And even though Red didn't go that route, she ultimately looked to Vision, the boys, and even Agatha to lend a hand. And what's truly interesting about Scarlet's situation is that in her grief, she took what are often two very different approaches. Yes, she tried to escape her trauma, but she also tried to control her situation. I don't think I have to go into too much detail to explain that one. When you're able to completely suppress someone's personality and replace it with that of a stock sitcom character and then transform the town into whatever era of TV comedy you want to parody that week, yeah, that's next level control freak right there. And minus the magical powers, there's something that we can see in our own lives. In some cases, people who have experienced loss and trauma respond to those events by trying to take back control over their lives. It can show in small ways, like suddenly becoming focused on cleaning your home, Or it could go into Finding Nemo territory where someone could be obsessed with doing everything in their power to prevent a bad situation from ever happening again. And you can't deny that's exactly what Maximoff did. Her desire for control was so strong that she recreated her boyfriend from scratch. Now, we can debate the ethics of rebuilding sentient life after it's been destroyed another time. But can someone explain to me how Tommy and Billy got to be? Was it a when a man robot and a woman love each other very much situation? Or did she just magic herself some kids? Help me understand that in the comments. But I'm getting sidetracked here. We should want a measure of control in our lives. No one should want every little detail of their lives dictated for them, because we all strive for some level of independence. Shoot, even babies do that, and they're completely helpless. But the harsh truth is that we all need to acknowledge is that as much as we try, we don't have that much control over what happens to us. Plans change, people change, we change, and those fluctuations can cause consequences that we had no idea could happen. Life is unpredictable, and any attempt to try to grab all the control is a fool's errand. Because even Wanda's attempt to play God didn't work. She had no idea that Agatha was pulling her own strings in the Maximoff puppet show that she was running. She couldn't control what Sword was doing outside the Hex. And at some points, Wanda had difficulty controlling her own powers, which were required to keep the whole thing going. And here's the ultimate problem when trying to take all the control as a response to loss. It can lead you to saying goodbye all over again. If we go to the end of WandaVision, Ruby ends up bidding farewell to not just the world that she created, but to the family that she made. This all leads her exactly where she was at the beginning of the series, alone. Her excessive need for control in order to never be left alone again was a direct cause of her being left alone again. And for us, unbalanced control can have the same effect. It can end up looking like self-sabotage in the long run. The effort it takes to grasp for control over things you ultimately don't have any in will only lead to a house of cards situation. It doesn't take much for the whole structure to fall apart. We saw it happen with Wanda, and the same thing can happen to us. We need to handle our business and control what we can. I'm not saying just to throw all responsibility and go bump all. God, this guy ain't saying that. What I'm advocating though is balance. And if your first response to loss is looking for some means to take control of your life, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because doing so can be a helpful way to cope and is a big part of personal growth. We just need to be careful about how far we take it, lest we create a hex of our own. One that may not brainwash people or create life, but one that's just as fragile and difficult to maintain. At the beginning of WandaVision, the Scarlet Witch was one of the most underrated heroes in the MCU. She had an amazing story, an intriguing personality, and had a lot more power than even she knew. And now that WandaVision is out and done, not only do we get to see what she's really capable of and get a much overdue dive on her backstory, we get to see what happens when we don't take on our grief and loss properly. We end up obsessed with our past, preferring to run away from life instead of taking it on, and grasping for control that on the inside we know we don't really have. But I want to leave you with what can happen when we do move on from the past, accept our limitations, and confront our pain. And it's the same thing that happened to Wanda. We get transformation. We experience the power of knowing what we can control and being okay with it. We experience the strength to overcome challenges and seeing that we're capable of more than what we thought. And we experience freedom to write a new chapter. Like I said in the first Wanda video, progressing past pain doesn't mean forgetting about it or that it never impacts you, but rather it means that those events don't have the ability to keep you down. And as we saw with our powered up witch, when we have that kind of freedom, it opens up a whole universe of possibility. Iron Man, founding member of the Avengers and one of the most important characters in the MCU, known the world over as one of the greatest heroes of all time. What we often forget is that he didn't start that way. Rise up, GG Nation, because it's time for Guidance Guide Friday, your weekly guidance lesson from your internet school counselor. And today, as we enter 2025, let's take a closer look to see just how Tony Stark went from billionaire playboy philanthropist to GOAT. Let's go! It's guidance time!
Truth is, I am Iron Man.
Listen, I'm not gonna waste time telling you who Iron Man is. If you need a tutorial on who Iron Man is, where have you been for the last almost 20 years, bro? If I were to ask you who Tony Stark is, I'm willing to bet that a lot of you would talk about his big-time accomplishments. Being the CEO of Stark Industries, surviving being held hostage in the middle of the desert, or saving the world/universe multiple times. And while all of that is true, there's a huge part of Stark's story that we often forget in all the shine of his W's. Tony didn't come out of the box a perfect person. In fact, if we're keeping it a buck, he was a massive jerk.
You're a jerk. I know. You're a jerk.
Like the fact that the biggest enemy in the first Avengers and Iron Man movies wasn't Obadiah or Loki, it was Tony's own ego. Stark's annoying habit of believing that he knew better than anybody in any given situation might have given him confidence, but also made him extremely unlikable. Kinda hard to be a team player when you truly believe that you don't need anybody else because you're the main character of life. Of course, there's nothing wrong with believing in yourself and your abilities. That's all a part of having good self-esteem and liking yourself. But when you need to be the center of attention all the time or put people down to make yourself feel good, both are things that Tony did back in the day, it's a red flag that whoever's doing that probably doesn't like themselves as much as they want you to think. Because those with healthy self-esteem don't feel the need to hype themselves up all the time and certainly don't see the good in tearing others down. Another issue Tony's had is with his recklessness. Was almost sacrificing himself in the first Avengers movie the only way to save the world? Or how about Iron Man 2, when he waited way too long to let anybody know that his iron heart was slowly poisoning him and that he needed help? And that's another sign that your ego's a little too big there. And do we need to talk about Ultron? Yeah, let's turn ChatGPT into a superhero that can save the world for us.
What could possibly go wrong?
For a genius, Tony doesn't always think things out. And lastly, the Iron Man has a really strong stubborn streak going on. Very much connected to his ego problem, Stark can be very my way or the highway about things. Like, really man? Was the only way to figure out the whole Sokovia Accords thing was to duke it out with your best friends and a random high schooler that you've been stalking? Hey yo! I remind you of this, not because this is a secret hit piece on the man who made the MCU, but to remind you that at the end of the day, every single person is just that. A person. They will have their flaws, mistakes, and character weaknesses that can really mess them up if they allow them to. But keep this in mind as we move on from Iron Man's character flaws to the actual L's he's had to take throughout the years. Looking back at Iron Man's story, we see a lot of victories that he's notched up, but what we often forget are his stumbles, mistakes, and absolute failures that he had along the way. If we go back to the first Iron Man movie, we remember Tony escaping the cave with his beta version Iron Man suit, and then later the appearance of his more iconic costume. But do you recall his testing montage? Where we see Stark improve his suit through trial and error, and let's be real, it was a lot more error than trial.
And 3, 2, 1.
Homeboy gets himself wrecked over and over again just to get the suit exactly the way he wanted it to. And what was the end result? The birth of a hero. And if we go back to Age of Ultron, it's really easy to say after the fact that Ultron was always going to go rogue and become the very problem it was trying to prevent. But the Iron Man really saw the potential in having a suit of armor around the world to go beyond the Avengers' limitations. And what did Tony do when his grand scheme blew up in his face and literally created a whole behind country? He apologized, made amends, and did better. And that's what we could do in times when we screw up. Wallowing in it won't help you or anyone else, and blaming others doesn't change the facts. And we know this because Stark did both. In Iron Man 2, when his mechanical heart was slowly killing him, he dove into a well of despair over his impending doom. His situation didn't change until his mindset did, when he went back to the lab to start getting better. Or how about in Endgame when after getting saved from the vacuum of space, Stark blames Captain America for Thanos winning and allowing the snap to happen. Did he feel better in the moment? Yeah, a little bit. But did it fix anything? Nope. It wasn't until he talked to Cap, apologized, and took responsibility for his role in the Thanos situation. Not only were the Avengers able to take the first step in saving the universe, but repairing his relationship with Steve. And while we're on the topic of Endgame, even though the time heist ended up being successful, it wasn't a flawless mission. When Tony, Cap, and Ant-Man go back to the first Avengers movie to get the first Infinity Stone, they end up taking an L when Loki escapes with the glowing rock. And take into account that everyone was told that there would be no do-overs, it wasn't looking good. What do you do in a situation like that? Well, you could be like the Avenger that everybody loves to forget and have a freak out about it. Or you could do what Iron Man and Cap did. Get creative and find another way around the problem. They end up going back to the 70s, getting the stone back, all while Tony gets some one-on-one time with his old man. And because of that creativity and the combined efforts of the other Avengers, it led up to them saving the world, the universe, and one of the greatest moments in the MCU. And it's through moments like these that we can also realize that losses can lead to wins.
And I
As we've seen with Iron Man, every single time he tried to accomplish something great, he had to come up against either his own flaws as a person or mistakes that he made. And we're no different. We all have parts of ourselves that we wish we didn't have, or have made mistakes that we were able to Thanos snap away. But what we need to remember in this new year is that a loss is only a failure if you let it. Our world today is addicted to instant results, next day delivery. A top athlete needs to impact their team immediately, and any change we want to make to our lives needs to bring results yesterday. But Iron Man shows us that true victory isn't a three-step process. Sometimes we need to lose, to fall on our face and make mistakes. And when that happens, we can't take that as a sign to quit or that we're not good enough. Just realize that you need to find another way. We need to learn from our L's and make the most of our mistakes before we get the results we want. The story of Iron Man shows us a lot. How a selfish man can become selfless, how anyone can change, and that in order to get what we want in life, we will need to lose before we can win.
From now on, we're poison to Peter Parker and Spider-Man. You'll see us everywhere, even in your nightmares.
Rise up, GG Nation, because it's time for Guidance Guy Friday, your weekly guidance lesson from your internet school counselor. And yeah, you saw the title, and I'm not playing. Is one of Spider-Man's greatest enemies simply the end result of what happens when folks get hooked on drugs? How on earth is Venom a Tootsie Roll toddler? I'm glad you asked. Let's go! It's guidance time! If I'm gonna break down how Buff Boy Spider-Man is just a battery acid baby, we need to break down Venom himself. The character of Venom is actually a fusion of two other characters, Eddie Brock, a regular human person, and a symbiote, an alien that looks more like living throw-up than anything actually alive. And it's when they bond together that they become Venom and gain all the cool powers and stuff. And it's here that we have Exhibit A. Just like how the stuff preys on people in pain, Eddie was a man in pain. Most of the time, people who are hooked on drugs take it to deal with something wrong in their lives. It could be a loss they experienced, not having a job, or their life just being overall trash in that moment. People who get hooked aren't evil, they're sad, scared, and broken. And Eddie was the same way before he met the symbiote. Brock was a reporter in his heyday, and he was great at what he did. He did more than pursue stories. He pursued the truth. But sadly, all it took was one mistake to destroy his life. And it was on the case to find a criminal named the Sin Eater, but ended up pegging the wrong guy as the perp. It was when the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man found the Sin Eater's true identity, Brock's rep was wrecked. He got fired from his job, his wife left him, and his dad disowned him. It's pretty fair to say that Eddie was in a dark place, which made him a perfect match for the symbiote. The symbiote was attracted to Brock because the alien itself was also rejected, by Spider-Man of all people. Okay, so quick detour. The symbiote bonded to the webhead first when it got to Earth. The symbiote made Spider-Man stronger, faster, and gave him that sweet black costume. But it also made the Spider more angry, more aggressive, and more willing to do things that the regular Spider-Man wouldn't. So Peter ditched the costume and told E.T. to kick rocks and phone home. Remember this, because this is going to be important later. The symbiote and Eddie's mutual pain is what brought them together, which leads to the second reason why evil Spider-Man is an ice infant. Venom is chasing a high. In real life, people who fall prey to drugs want the good feeling that comes from taking the stuff. They want that good feeling to escape the problems that they have. And Venom does the exact same thing. All the super strength and web-slinging action that Venom brings is a great distraction from Eddie's life of brokenness and rejection. Who cares if you don't have a job when you can steal all the money you'll ever need? Who cares if Daddy doesn't love you? You can beat up Spider-Man! The power trip that Venom gives to Brock makes him feel bigger than life. Invincible even. It is that invincible feeling that creates my last piece of evidence. Eddie keeps coming back. In the movies and comics, Big Ed tries many times to quit the symbiote, and on occasion he's even able to do so. For a little bit. But what happens is that the symbiote always finds his way back to Eddie, and Eddie always takes the symbiote back. And sadly, that's the struggle for a lot of people who try to quit drugs go on. They try and fail. Not because they don't want to, not because they don't want it bad enough, but because living a life without something you've told yourself you needed just to get by is incredibly difficult. Not impossible, but quitting a habit can be a lifelong battle. So we have an anti-hero who's hiding pain by chasing the high that life as Venom gives him, and it keeps him in a loop of using, trying to quit, and then coming back. But maybe you're not convinced yet. That's fine, cause you know who agrees with me? Spider-Man.
We are Venom.
So even though no one connected to Venom's creation as a character has ever come out and said, yeah, Venom's a metaphor for drugs, bro, other people see it that way, and one of them is in fact Spider-Man. That's right, the web slinger's with me on this. He also believes that slinging over to subscribe and unmasking that like button would help your friendly neighborhood guidance guy. Let's go over to the Spider-Man 2 game that came out not too long ago. Yeah, we got Miles Morales in it, and that's awesome. But we also got a certain gooey alien that also shows up. And this is where I hope you remember that mental note I told you to keep earlier, because it's gonna pay off right now. As you play Spider-Man 2, you are the New York Defender with the symbiote powers. He's stronger, able to throw guys around in ways old Spidey simply couldn't. But as the game story goes on, the toxic alien begins to poison Peter. The voice actor that played Peter Parker in SM2, Yuri Lowenthal, is on the record saying that his performance as Peter in the Black was based on, quote, behaviors of addiction. What are those behaviors of addiction? Well, you already know one of them, that super good feeling that comes when you're on the stuff. Spidey loved that increase in strength, speed, as well as all the crazy extra powers that the symbiote had. But it's that high that gets you hooked, wanting more and more, which is what happens to Peter in the game. He becomes reckless, takes risks that he otherwise wouldn't take because he's chasing that high, which then leads to the substance changing you as a person. When Peter puts on the black suit, Peter gets so grimdark, he's willing to finish off villains just to show how much stronger he is. And it's this exact pattern that people hooked on drugs experience. They get that hit of happiness to distract them from their problems. It feels so good that they want to relive that moment over and over again. But as time goes on, that feeling gets harder to come by, so they need to take more of it to get that same feeling. And the more they take, the more the person changes. They get angry more easily. They start to betray their own beliefs, and all they care about is getting their next fix. And also in the comics, we see readers come to that same conclusion, that the symbiote, and by extension Venom, symbolize what addiction looks like. And that's not even counting his kids. Yup, Venom's big, he's bad, and he's also a dad. Venom has 7 kids, each of them with their own unique abilities, but also the same struggles that Venom has. And now that we've looked at Venom's background and family tree, let's get personal with this. How does this all connect to you? The story of Venom is ultimately a cautionary tale, a warning against the dangers of substances. That though it can bring out the worst in people and turn them into monsters, people who become hooked often don't start that way. That drugs can bring you up, but they also have the power to bring you down even lower than you were before. And the process of giving it up could turn to an endless lifelong battle. The obvious takeaway is to stop before you start. Whether we're talking about alcohol, smoking, or vaping, and yes, vaping is bad for you too. These things can take over your life if you let them. Don't give them that chance. But like we said, people who fall to this stuff do so in order to cope with their lives. So what can we do instead? Let's find out. Welcome back to the Character Corner, and let's talk about what we could do instead of going to dangerous substances to avoid our problems. Doing so is a great example of good decision making. So instead of running to drugs that can get you hooked, try talking out your problems. Talk to a close friend or safe adult whom you trust to talk to. For some, that alone can be enough. For others, you may want to write it out. Sure, you could make a journal, but you can also write a poem, song, spoken word, whatever you need to express yourself. But perhaps the most important decision you can make to deal with life's lows is to not deal with it yourself. Many people who get hooked trick themselves into thinking that they're alone in their pain and struggle, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Don't bottle up your feelings. Don't think nobody cares. Make the choice to ask for help. Even if you don't think you'll get it the first time, don't stop until you get it. Though Venom never truly learned this lesson, it's not too late for you. You're not alone, other people care, and you have the power to bounce back.
The PS5. Wait, hold up. 5? How did we get here so soon? It feels like just yesterday when the PS4 was the new hotness that everyone was trying to get their hands on, and now we're being told we gotta shell out some $500 for Sony's new gaming machine? Well, it's better than what this thing is going for online. Seriously, eBay? $1,000 for the PS5 in 2020.
Bruh.
You're crazy, man. But the PS5 hype is getting me thinking about the launch titles for the system, and perhaps the one I'm excited for the most is Spider-Man Miles Morales. 2018's Spider-Man game is one of the best superhero games of all time and is by far the best Spider-Man game. It took 16 years, but finally somebody dethroned the 6th generation classic Spider-Man 2 from 2004. And now you're telling me there's a sequel to that game starring the Miles Morales?
Let's go!
But, shameless fanboy hype aside, what can we gain from the Kid Arachnid? What are some lessons from his life that we can use? I'm the guidance guy, and let's swing into this. Since the characterization for Miles was pretty limited in the Spider-Man game, and let's be honest here, you ain't reading a comic book unless it's a manga, okay? So for the sake of this video, we're going to be sticking with the Enter the Spider-Verse version of the web slinger. At first, Miles doesn't really fit the description of someone who's about to be Spider-Man, because for starters, both of his parents are still alive. In most cases, that would disqualify him from being a hero in the first place. Where's your angst gonna come from if you're not an orphan, son? Not only that, but he seems to be living a pretty good life. He's not the target of bullying, he's not a socially awkward basket case. In fact, the only tough thing in his life right now is the fact that he's starting over at a school that his parents want him to go to. So far this is not very Spider-Man-like. A core part of Spider-Man's story is tragedy and misfortune, whether it's Uncle Ben dying, his girlfriend dying, or his best friends becoming his sworn enemies. Spider-Man's gotta have some drama. And that drama comes right about the time Miles gets that fated bug bite. Cue the awkwardness of understanding and mastering new powers, getting into the crime-fighting hustle, and that's before the universes start swapping spider people like Pokemon cards. But it's with these zany versions of our familiar hero that we get to the meat of this movie, the importance of support systems. You want to know a dirty little secret about comic book heroes? A lot of the time, these guys go about saving the world like Mr. Incredible.
I work alone.
Superman, Wonder Woman, Iron Man, unless they're explicitly part of a group that they're often reluctant to join in the first place, or they're like Batman who occasionally recruits teens to run around the city bashing people's heads in, our heroes save the day single-handedly. We see these exploits and go, I want to be that guy or girl. We want to be the one with the power to go in and solve all the problems by ourselves. But Enter the Spider-Verse flips that script by showing that Miles is at his most successful when he's not running point alone. He's being mentored by another version of Peter Parker, and the rest of the Spider Crew is there to give insight to their newest member. And this helps Miles understand his powers, his situation, and just what it means to be Spider-Man. And what's interesting is that this movie goes against another major Spider-Man trope, that he often goes through his personal struggles alone. Be it fighting crime or balancing the hero and civilian life, Peter has almost condemned himself to solving all his problems solo. But Miles doesn't go for that. He fully embraces the role of Spider-Man, but he also embraces help, mentorship, and assistance with his life. And I believe this is what makes this version of Spider-Man not only special, but so needed right now. This year, a lot of us have had to get used to doing some things alone. Whether it's living away from friends and loved ones, learning from home as your living room becomes your classroom, there's a certain kind of isolation that has hit us like nothing before. But it's in times like this that we're tempted to think that we're stuck like this, that we have to go through whatever it is we're going through by ourselves. And that's just not true. Just like how Miles discovered that there are in fact other people who have gone through exactly what he's experiencing, the same is true for us. I mean, seriously, if Miles can find other people who understand him, we can too. That line of "no one understands you" is an absolute lie. And just like how Miles reached out for help, don't be afraid to do that too. FaceTime a close friend, chat up a family member on WhatsApp, make an attempt to reach out. Because since a lot of us are going through the same emotions right now, you'll quickly find someone who can offer support, understanding, or even just a break from the chaos around us. We all go through times when we feel down, but it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Because when we find our support, that's when we find out just how much we can truly elevate. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what other characters and franchises you'd like me to discuss next. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video is ready. Until next time.